Tonight, Kyiv's allies put pressure on Moscow to end the war in Ukraine. An upbeat Volodymyr Zelensky joins EU leaders as they follow Donald Trump in hitting Russia with new sanctions.
We have sanctions on Russian energy. We don't have meeting in Hungary without Ukraine. And we have not yet tomahawks.
US measures targeting Russia's two biggest oil companies spark a surge in oil prices, with India and China eyeing alternative suppliers. President Putin says he will never bow to pressure from abroad, describing the sanctions as an unfriendly act. We'll get the view from Moscow and Washington tonight. Also ahead, history at the Vatican as the King and Pope exchange gifts and pray together in a 500-year first. Outcry in the US as plans to tear down the East Wing of the White House continue to make way for Donald Trump's ballroom. Plus, 50 years after women in Iceland went on strike, we remember the mass walkout that reshaped gender equality in the country. Tonight, pressure on Russia to end the war in Ukraine as the US and Europe move to hurt its war machine. EU leaders today following Donald Trump's lead by slapping a raft of new sanctions on Moscow. Oil prices jumped after the US president targeted Russia's two largest oil companies, saying talks with Vladimir Putin don't go anywhere. Volodymyr Zelensky joined EU leaders in Brussels as they announced measures against Russian liquefied gas and its shadow fleet. But Kyiv's allies stopped short of endorsing a deal to turn frozen Russian assets into funds to support Ukraine in its fight. Well, we'll get reaction from Moscow and Washington, but first tonight, our Europe correspondent, Siobhan Robbins, has this report from Brussels.
After a difficult day last week in Washington, D.C., a warm welcome in Europe. President Zelensky arriving in Brussels to positive news. New sanctions, including measures targeting Russian liquefied natural gas for the first time. So could this move Ukraine closer to peace? Do you think a ceasefire is still possible?
Ceasefire is possible, of course. And I think all of us need ceasefire. But we need more pressure on Russia.
On Wednesday, Trump helped pile on that pressure with sanctions on two Russian oil giants, his patience with Putin suddenly wearing thin.
This should be easier to do, but the level of hatred between Zelensky and Putin is very substantial.
This is the first time since his re-election President Trump's imposed direct costs on Russia, but Putin was defiant.
This is an unfriendly act towards Russia. It's obvious. It doesn't help strengthen Russian-American relations, which have only just begun to recover. Such action by the US administration certainly damages Russia-US relations. It's an attempt to exert pressure on Russia. But no self-respecting country and self-respecting people make any decisions under pressure.
But even with the sanctions, peace feels as distant as ever. Russia continues to hammer Ukraine and isn't budging on its maximalist demands. And while Kyiv hits Russian refineries, they're still missing the US long-range Tomahawk missiles, which would allow deeper strikes. Zelensky's missile mission to the US capital last Friday reportedly descended into a shouting match.
Mr. President, can you tell us how it went in D.C. last Friday?
But when asked about the clash, Ukraine's leader remained diplomatic.
The result of this meeting, we have sanctions on Russian energy. We don't have meeting in Hungary without Ukraine. And we have not yet tomahawks. That's it. This is the result. I think not bad.
In contrast to the volatility across the Atlantic, Europe is something of a safe haven, consistent, reliable. But despite that, the spectre of President Trump is ever present. And that's not the only headache for Zelensky. The EU's still arguing about loaning billions of frozen Russian assets to Ukraine, a windfall which would seriously boost Kyiv's war chest. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News, Brussels.
Well, let's go live now to Helsinki and the former Finnish Minister of Foreign Affairs, Pekka Haavisto. Very good to see you. How optimistic then are you feeling after the package of sanctions we saw today from the European Union, what we saw from the US last night and the UK last week, in fact, that this could be a turning point in the war?
Well, these sanctions are important now. This was the 19th package of the European Union sanctions, and actually first time we saw a real movement from the US side. President Trump made sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil, which are the biggest oil-producing companies in Russia. And this could also mean that those who are dealing with these companies, buying oil from these companies, could be under secondary sanctions. And then we have to see how India now will react, how China will react, who are the big importers of oil and gas from Russia.
Well, President Putin has reacted, has he not, given his first response, first of all, to the US sanctions, describing them as an unfriendly act. Dialogue is always better than war. And on Europe and LNG, liquefied natural gas imports, self-destructive. I mean, is he right about that?
Well, oil and gas is a very big part of the Russian economy. It's around a third of their income revenues that the state is getting. So they certainly are nervous. But of course, we will see only step by step how these are influencing. And I think these secondary sanctions are very important as well. This timing was a little bit surprised from President Trump, because we just have been earlier learning that there is a planned meeting in Budapest. It was cancelled now and so forth. So I think something has happened also behind the scene in the relation between Russia and US to explain this momentum.
Well, yes, potentially frustration from Donald Trump, who said yesterday that he has good conversations, but they go nowhere. Are you confident, though, given the flip-flop we've seen from the US president, that he will stay the course on this? As you described, you have to see how other companies react, Chinese refineries, for example, to see if secondary sanctions can be fully applied, and that needs America to do that.
Well, that needs America to do that. And of course, how you follow these sanctions now is an important issue, that it's not only a statement, but it's something that is real life and would be implemented fully. But if this would be implemented, this has also direct impact to countries that are importing oil from Russia, including really India, China, Turkey, and so forth. So it's an important decision. And I think this is a turning point on US behavior now in this crisis, and really try to push Russia to the negotiation table, which is important.
And how important is it to damage the Russian economy to help in the war in Ukraine?
Well, of course, we are living now the fourth year of the conflict, and it's very important that we influence also to the Russian economy, that they should have second thoughts now and not to try to conquer the whole Donbass, for example, but come to the table and negotiate peacefully. And this is what we are trying to do from the European side, and what US is trying to do. And I think there is a common frustration that negotiations are not starting. There is not a serious ground for negotiations from the Russian side.
Well, let's talk specifically about the European side, as you put it. The sanctions package includes, eventually, certainly not immediately, Russian liquefied natural gas imports. But there are some glaring admissions here, aren't there? First of all, pipeline gas and crude oil. Is President Trump correct when he says Europe is simply too wedded still to Russian energy, apologies?
Well, partly President Trump is right, and we as European countries have been, of course, very critical to some of the member states, like Hungary, that has been based very much their energy system on the Russian energy. And when they are explaining it, we are saying that you should do more to hurry away from the dependence on the Russian energy. And, for example, Finland has cut the ties, the pipeline and so forth to Russia, and due to this conflict. And I think there are ways to find alternative energy sources for Europe. So Europe should speed up this process.
Well, indeed, Hungary had threatened to veto this sanctions package. Slovakia eventually dropped its block on it too. They are both the biggest buyers of Russian oil in the European Union. Divisions that seriously raise questions, don't you think, about their allegiances? Where do they lie?
Well, of course, we have many members in European Union, and it's an animal of many countries and their political lines and so forth. And the most important is that we have now come together at the 19th package and can press forward Russia with these sanctions. And now we have, in many ways, US on board as well to the same directions. And of course, UK has done its decisions already. So this is important that we have a big alliance on pressuring Russia at the moment.
Yes, a restoration of the alliance, you could argue. So potentially difficult questions on that 19th sanctions package. Difficult questions, too, about what to do about frozen Russian assets. Should they be released, do you think, to help the Ukrainian war effort?
Well, I think there has been very constructive proposals by Commission already how this could be done and how the frozen assets could be used as a guarantee to give some loans to Ukraine. And I'm very much in favor of that kind of concept. Unfortunately, it looks like this evening decisions have again been a little bit postponed to the next meetings. The mechanism is still under construction, but I think that would give a very big resource for Ukraine for the rebuilding of the country. And this is something that Ukraine needs.
Many, of course, want to see Tomahawk cruise missiles given by America. We heard from Donald Trump last night that it would involve intense training of 6 to 12 months. The only way they could currently be used is if the Americans fired them themselves, and they're not willing to do that. Are they off the table, do you think? And how do you and how does Finland feel about that?
That's very difficult to say. There has always been these discussions. Earlier it was about the German tanks or German missiles and so forth and so forth. It's, of course, finally a national decision what kind of resources you can give to Ukraine. But I think it's very important that we now speed up the military support, generally speaking, to Ukraine, because Ukraine is depending on our support and we do what we can. And, of course, let's hope that the US is also on board on this.
Pekka Haavisto, very good to have your thoughts there. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
So how then do the US sanctions on Russian oil work, and who will feel the effect of them? Our business and economics correspondent Paul Kelso has been taking a look.
The sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil are significant because they target the two biggest energy providers in Russia. Together, they produce more than half of Russia's fossil fuels, which in itself produces around 25% of the Kremlin's revenues, money that has been used to wage war on Ukraine. Now, the aim is to deny those companies access to the US financial system and all the other services that grease the wheels of the oil trade and try and cut revenues from fossil fuels that have actually stayed pretty robust. This chart shows us how much Russia has raked in from oil and gas since the war. Actually, after the invasion of Ukraine, the oil price went up and the Kremlin benefited. Now, it did dip after the EU and others said they wouldn't use Russian oil, but it was still around 800 million euros a day from oil. It's dipped down to closer to 600 million in the last year, but this is still a really significant amount of money. Now, why has it stayed so robust? Well, the answer is that the customers changed, but the volume of oil hasn't really. Let's have a look at how that has worked. Before the war, the EU was the biggest customer of Russian oil and gas, followed by China, Turkey, some others, the UK and India right down the bottom. Well, what happened next? The European Union said it wouldn't use oil, so it dropped down, hasn't weaned itself off gas. That's the remaining blue line. The UK, we were negligible anyway. It dwindled to nothing. Look at India down here, a tiny customer. It became the second biggest customer for Russian oil and gas, behind China, which was already buying a lot. Also Turkey. We might call these allies of economic convenience for Vladimir Putin. They certainly have helped the Kremlin pay for the war. Look again, the volumes, they're not down that much, despite all the disdain for Russia. Now, India's under a lot of pressure from these sanctions. There was a punishment tariff of 25% imposed by Donald Trump last week because of the amount of oil they were using from Russia. This shows us the volumes that have come from Russia into India, and we break it down by the two companies, Rosneft and Lukoil. You can see well more than half of all the oil. Also a reminder of the grey area, that's other Russian companies who aren't sanctioned, who can continue trading. There's another factor here, perhaps the biggest factor of all, the oil price. Why now from Donald Trump? Well, the oil price is relatively low, $60 dollars a day, a little spike of under 5% since this news, but that gives room to squeeze supply without hurting American consumers. The White House just as sensitive, if not more, to the price of petrol at the pumps than it is to foreign wars. The question now is whether this will work. The official word is that sanctions are meant to change behaviour, not punish the recipients. We'll have to see if that works this time with Vladimir Putin.
Paul Kelso there. Well, away from sanctions, Russian oil and other energy infrastructure has also been the target of Ukrainian missile and drone attacks, with strikes repeatedly targeting refineries, putting the Kremlin's main source of income under intense pressure. Analysis by Sky's data and forensics team has found at least 7 refineries have been struck, twice or more, since the 25th of August. 5 of the refineries hit by Ukraine are owned by the 2 companies targeted in those US sanctions. Well, Kyiv has also attacked petrol stations, while fuel prices in Russia have surged more than 30% since the beginning of the war. There are signs the strategy is having a real effect on Russian people, with videos on social media showing long queues amid fears of fuel shortages. Our Moscow correspondent, Ivor Bennett, has more now on how the measures are being felt in Russia.
Moscow has been quick to dismiss these sanctions and their impact, saying they're counterproductive and insisting they will fail. But behind that bravado, I think there is concern here. Concern at the sanctions themselves. The 2 companies targeted, Lukoil and Rosneft, are the economic equivalent to the Russian crown jewels. They are the 2 biggest oil companies here. They haven't been touched before by the sanctions for fear of hiking global energy prices, and they represent a vital source of revenue for the economy. So there's concern there, and also concern at the U-turn performed by Donald Trump. Don't forget, it's less than a week ago that he was talking about holding another summit with Vladimir Putin. There was all that matey language again. But now all of a sudden he's imposed sanctions, and this is the first time he's taken concrete action against Russia since returning to office. I think there was a sense here in Moscow that he would never actually do it, that he would never follow through on any of these threats since he's made so many in recent months. But now, all of a sudden, I think he's taken Moscow by surprise, and I think inside the Kremlin they will be wondering now, what's he going to do next? How much further is he going to go? In terms of whether or not these sanctions will work, will they hurt the Kremlin? I'm not sure they will in the short term. I'm not sure they'll cut off funding, as the US Treasury says, to Russia's war machine, because Russia has managed to maintain high levels of military spending via tax hikes and spending cuts, and economists say there is more fat that they can trim before having to reduce defence spending. In the long term, though, this could be painful for the Russian economy if it forces countries like China and India to stop buying up Russian oil, and India today has already indicated it would consider doing that. Either way, though, there's no sign that this is going to force Vladimir Putin to change course. There's no sign he's going to do that. When it comes to Ukraine, Russia has said today its goals remain unchanged.
Well, Tom Keating is an expert in sanctions and the director of the Centre for Finance and Security at the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI. I asked him his view on how these latest measures will impact Russia.
This is what we've been waiting for since Donald Trump was inaugurated. Kind of the band is back together, the EU, the US and the UK sort of working in coordination to target Russian oil, which at the end of the day is the critical resource that Russia needs in order to raise revenue to finance its war in Ukraine.
So what are they specifically designed to do? Because already there are reports, some reports that Chinese oil companies are going to suspend Russian imports due to concerns over the sanctions, and Indian companies as well.
So here's the thing. We've spent months, in fact, years calling for a reduction in revenue that Russia raises from selling its oil. And to do that, you need people to stop buying that oil. We've been chasing ships around the oceans, sanctioning them and so on. But ultimately, now, in a way, we're going for the jugular, which is to make it very clear that if you choose to continue to buy Russian oil, then you will face what is essentially the full force of the US sanctions machine. So it's great to hear that China is taking these steps. India too, we hope, and that will really hit the Kremlin in the pocket, and that's what will make them think twice about their ongoing war.
But what proportion of the global market slice in oil and gas does Russia have? And if it's taken away, what does it do to oil prices, which impacts all of us?
Well, let's look at India as an example. India used to buy single-digit percentages of its oil from Russia, but over the last 3.5 years, that's risen to high 30%. So if we could reduce India's purchase of oil from Russia back down to the low single digits, or indeed zero, that would be a tremendous change. Now, there are and there have been long-standing concerns about oil price shocks, energy shocks, in taking the action that has been taken by the UK last week and the United States overnight. I think we are in a better place to pressure the energy markets these days because there's more supply in the market. The Americans could step in to provide additional oil. Gulf countries could do so. So now is the right time to be taking these steps.
And the ambition, of course, is to damage the Russian economy. Is that quantifiable, the hit they would take?
So I think we need to be kind of careful how we phrase this. Damage the Russian economy, decimate the Russian economy, that's sort of political rhetoric. I think what we're trying to do here is to make Vladimir Putin make choices. Does he spend money in a profligate way on his war in Ukraine? Or does he realize that actually his budget is limited and he does need to spend it on the people of Russia? So I think that's the mission here, is to make Vladimir Putin face choices.
Yes, make him more reasonable, I think was the language that Donald Trump used last night. In terms of Europe specifically, we saw measures today against the energy, military and financial sectors of the Russian economy, and specifically two, on the abduction of Ukrainian children. There was a but to all of this, wasn't there? Some elements of the European Union very keen to keep buying Russian energy. Are they tackling that too?
I mean, it is a stain on the EU that the countries in the EU continue to buy Russian oil and gas. Many countries in the EU have rid themselves of that addiction, but some have not. And frankly, for as long as the European Union continues to fund Russia's war in Ukraine, which is fundamentally what they're doing, that is clearly a problem. So great news that the EU has moved forward with sanctions, but it has to wean itself off Russian energy as soon as possible.
And we're talking specifically about Hungary and Slovakia here. Obviously, we had elements this week from the European Union of phasing out Russian energy. In terms of Russia, Russia says it has a strong immunity to Western sanctions. Is that true? How could they protect themselves?
Because night follows day, Russia will say that sanctions don't affect it, that sanctions affect Western economies more than they affect Russia. You just have to look at the struggles that Russian industry is having at keeping going. You just have to look at the price of basic commodities in Russia. I mean, there is no doubt that sanctions are having an effect. And these latest steps by the United States, the UK and the EU to really target Russia's oil revenue will only push the economy into more and more trouble.
And if it proves to be effective, why not do it sooner?
That is a question that many like I have been asking for years now. I think the initial reticence back in 2022, 2023 was a view that targeting the oil in a hard way was going to drive up energy prices. I mean, remember, we had inflation of 10, 11% in the UK. We had energy bills through the roof. No government wanted to pile on the pressure and the pain in that situation. Now we're in a very different environment where there is a looser market, as they say, and therefore now is the time to do this and frankly not to delay any longer.
And can I ask you one final question, which is about frozen Russian assets, this great push to see them released for the Ukrainian war effort. Is that a good idea? And what, in your view, are the downsides?
I don't think there are any downsides. I mean, I've been on the record for quite some time calling for this kind of action to be taken. There are those that say, well, if you were to do this, it would reduce trust in the euro. But let's remember, in 2022, $400 billion of Russian assets were immobilized by the G7 community. That was the point of maximum jeopardy. Now we're just talking about taking advantage of the fact that those assets have been immobilized or or frozen. And again, I'm afraid this is another stain on the European Union, which is that there are countries, in particular Belgium, that are holdouts on this because they see some potential downside, some liability that they might attract for moving against the assets, because the assets are held primarily in Belgium. But again, we need to ask ourselves the question, do we want to support Ukraine fully, or do we want to fiddle around and nibble at the edges? And I would argue clearly for the former.
And on sanctions, after what we've seen so far, what else could the European Union, the UK and the US do to keep the pressure on?
So there's a big issue outstanding here, which is whilst the focus has been on how Russia raises its revenue through oil, there has been less focus on how does Russia spend money buying the technology that it needs for its military. And the particular blind spot at the moment, which we know European policymakers are grappling with, is the question of cryptocurrency. How are digital assets, virtual assets being used by Russia to circumvent sanctions, to buy the components that they need from places like China? That's a festering sore, and that needs to be the next priority.
Tom Keating there from RUSI. Well, Donald Trump is set to meet China's Xi Jinping when he visits South Korea next week, with the US president saying he will raise the war in Ukraine with the Chinese leader. So let's bring in Sky's David Blevins, who's in Washington for us. And the focus for President Trump certainly shifting to this visit to Asia, including this long conversation, as he promised, with President Xi, David.
Yes, a busy few days ahead. President Trump will fly to Malaysia tomorrow, then on to Japan, and then finally South Korea, where he will meet with his Chinese counterpart. We know that there is a trade war raging between China and the United States, China having imposed export controls on rare minerals, so essential to the electronics and defence industries here in the United States. And Donald Trump has responded to that by imposing 100% tariffs, but he seems hopeful of striking a trade deal with President Xi, and says that's more likely if the Chinese president is prepared to use his influence in Russia to help broker a ceasefire in Ukraine. Speaking in terms of the recent sanctions, the new sanctions in Russia, the president's press secretary, Caroline Levitt, today said that he had repeatedly expressed frustration with Vladimir Putin, had seen no interest from the Kremlin in terms of his efforts to broker a ceasefire in recent days, and what he needed was tangible, positive outcomes at this stage. She dismissed any suggestion that it was a phone call between Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, and Sergei Lavrov, the Russian Foreign Minister, last week that had resulted in the plans for a summit being put on hold, and said the president simply needed more positive signals from the Russian president.
And David, while I've got you, let's talk about the ballroom, or do we call it just the demolition job at the moment, sending absolute shockwaves through Washington and beyond.
Yeah, it's remarkable, really, when you consider that the president has gone from focusing on the Middle East to Ukraine. He's looking ahead to Asia. Right now, he's chairing a panel on homeland security issues in the United States. And yet his press secretary, Caroline Levitt, says his number one priority right now is the building of a new ballroom at the White House. It is an issue that has sparked quite some controversy this week in Washington, not least because President Trump said this development would not interfere with the existing building. And since then, the entire east wing of the White House has been demolished without planning permission. It has also increased in size from 650 seats to 999, and increased in price from $200 million to $300 million. And there is some concern that private donors who are funding that may then have undue access, an extra influence, you might say, over the President of the United States. But Donald Trump is dismissing all of that. He says it is a ballroom presidents have wanted for 150 years and will be, in his opinion, one of the great ballrooms of the world.
Yeah, it looks huge, doesn't it, looking at the plans there. David, thank you very much indeed. And a little later in the programme, I will be speaking to a former chief historian at the White House. But David Blevins updating us there from Washington. Well, you're watching The World. Still to come, history at the Vatican as King Charles and the Pope pray together in a 500-year first.
we've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories.
This is insane.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News, get the full story first.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling.
It's not his country, it's ours.
Sky News, the full story first, free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in.
Well, to the Vatican now, where today King Charles and Pope Leo prayed publicly together in a moment of historic symbolism. It is the first time an English monarch and the pontiff have met for such an occasion in nearly 500 years, when the Church of England split from Rome. Our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills, reports now from the Vatican.
It was a welcome designed to catch our attention for a visit that means everything to the King. Camilla alongside him, wearing a black mantilla as a mark of respect.
Good morning. Welcome.
It's such a pleasure to meet you, if I may say so.
This is the first time they've both met the new Pope. In a sign of the attention and sensitivities around this visit, this clip was shown to the press, with both men commenting on the cameras.
Constant hazard.
Yes. You get used to it.
But was later removed from the official video released by the Vatican.
This is a copy of Pope Francis' message for the world day of peace.
Exchanging gifts, they couldn't have got on any better. But while friendship is important, this is also about making history. Inside the Sistine Chapel, they prayed alongside each other. The first time a monarch and pontiff have done that for 500 years, since Henry VIII broke away from the Catholic Church. With King Charles also governor of the Church of England, the optics could not be more significant for relations between the two faiths.
All of us have things in our past that we have to find reconciliation in, personally and institutionally. And that is an important part of growing together. We don't, as it were, lock up the past in a box. We try and embrace it.
But there was a wider message that both King and Pope wanted to share, the two men talking publicly about their passion for the environment, the soft power of the royals and the church on full display. You could see from their interactions that you have two men who have shared interests and passions, but as it was pointed out to me by the head of the Catholic Church for England and Wales, you also have two heads of state who are currently wrestling with issues around historical sexual abuse hanging over their institutions and how best to approach those publicly. Certainly not afraid to meet the public, there will be relief that there were no updates on the Prince Andrew problem.
Of course, it's going to have some degree of overshadowing, but hopefully just the beauty of this event will outshine all of that darkness.
I mean, that's like a little gossip interest, but I think for the Romans, this is a pretty big thing.
And that is where the jeopardy still lies for the royal family, as they try to draw our attention back to important moments like this. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News in Rome.
Well, this is the world. Next up, demolition at the White House as construction work begins on Donald Trump's $300 million ballroom. We will hear why not everyone is a fan.
a secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime. They don't care for that. Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Well, let's get more now on Donald Trump's plan to build a $300 million ballroom at the White House in the first major change to the historic property in decades. The president had said the project would not interfere with the existing landmark, but it's now become clear the entire East Wing will be demolished within days. So here we can see how it looked just last week, a part of the building that had been used as the First Lady's headquarters since the Carter administration, and also as a reception room and visitors' entrance. But heavy machinery has begun pulling down the entire building. Critics have raised fears that the planned renovation could overwhelm the White House itself. Well, I'm joined now by former chief historian at the White House, Edward Lengel. Great to hear from you. Has this just caught everybody by surprise? Did no one know this was going to happen? Has nobody been shouting about it?
So we've known about it for a couple of months, but we've been talking about it in the abstract. And I think when we saw a couple of days ago the photographs and the videos of the demolition going on, it's really touched a nerve for Americans across the political spectrum. I think that's important to emphasize. It's hit hard.
How is Donald Trump allowed to do this? He ultimately does not anywhere near own this building.
Well, there are a couple of areas. One is that normally presidents in the past, when they wanted to change things, they have to go to Congress and they ask for money from Congress to carry out these changes. The president has very cleverly circumvented that by saying that he's going to pay for it himself and with his donor friends. He says it's a gift, but it's actually a way to get around Congress. He's also generally been required to consult with different advisory bodies that have a stake in the architectural integrity of the White House, the Capitol, the National Mall, and he has not done so. A number of those bodies have protested, but they can't really stop him. They can slow him down, but they can't stop him.
Well, some people have likened images to the end result of the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg in Russia, no doubt making a political point there, or even to the ballroom in Beauty and the Beast. But it's gold and it's gilt. Do you like it?
Well, this is a big problem for me, and this comes from somebody. I'm a founding fathers historian. I've spent most of my life studying George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. And I've noticed a lot of American conservatives are beginning to step up and say this is a problem because it contradicts the founders' intent. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson specifically did not want this edifice to be anything like the Palace of Versailles or even like Buckingham Palace. They wanted it to be a president's home, a residence, and something that would project a particularly American idea of democracy. This ballroom is going to completely subvert the founders' intentions.
And while we're on changes, what has happened to the Rose Garden? That's very much goodbye beauty, hello beast, isn't it?
The Rose Garden has been paved. There have been a number of other changes. Now, I want to emphasize, though, every president has made changes like those. They certainly can do that. You can say it's distasteful, but another president can come in and change that back. The problem with the ballroom is that once it's built, it's practically impossible to get rid of. And I can guarantee the people who are paying to build it would not pay to tear it down. That would come down to the American taxpayer.
Yes, and the National Trust for Historic Preservation, set up, I think, by Congress to look after these historic buildings, say that the planned ballroom now threatens to overshadow the White House itself. And I mean, surely the nation does not want to see that.
It certainly does. It's 90,000 square feet. And so the executive mansion itself is 55,000 square feet. And so it is totally unprecedented, a complete change. The administration has been saying, oh, there have been changes before. What's the big deal? This is completely different. And I can guarantee average Americans are not going to be invited to any parties in the new ballroom. This will change it into something other than the people's house, which it used to be.
Well, as you said, the White House has pointed out there have been umpteen changes by various presidents, but a great long list on their website. For example, Obama created a basketball court out of a tennis court, Nixon converting the swimming pool into the press briefing room, Ford installing an outdoor pool, also funded by private donations like this. But is it fair to say, do you think, that Democrat history and Democrat presidential changes are being eradicated here? For example, it was Roosevelt who constructed the East Wing and the Kennedys who put in the Rose Garden.
Yeah, I've heard some sneering references to the East Wing. Supporters of this project are now calling it the left wing, and therefore there's nothing wrong with demolishing it, which is really tragic. I think that conservatives claim to believe in the founders. They claim to believe in our heritage. They complain when people try to tear down Washington and Jefferson and criticize them. And yet now at this time, they're saying, oh, wait, the founders don't really matter anymore. They're not relevant to us. We can make this into something new.
Well, Edward, hoping you'll get an invite in the future. It's going to seat 900. It'll fit a lot of people. Edward Lengel, former chief historian at the White House. Really good to have your thoughts. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, this is The World. Next up, remembering the day Iceland's women walked off the job. We'll hear how the 1975 strike sparked huge change.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. Sky News, the full story first.
I'm Martin Brunt and I'm Sky's crime correspondent.
I'm David Blevins and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Liberation Day.
By popular demand, here we are.
Donald Trump. It is quite the story. Wherever it goes, on Trump 100, we go with it.
Can you tell us who you're looking for?
Unbelievable we've come to this.
Are you overstating the reach and significance of this deal?
Not like you said it.
From the UK.
Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
It was 10 feet from him, and all of a sudden the shots rang out.
People impacted.
I'll tell you on another day on the podcast what that was all about.
Join us wherever you get your podcasts.
Go ahead, back white jacket.
Deborah Haynes from Sky News. He called you Daddy earlier.
No, he did it very affectionately. Daddy, you're my daddy.
Thank you.
Leicester is on its knees.
They've ripped the soul out of my factory and there's nothing left.
It is eerily quiet.
It's constantly on the brink of capacity.
There's overcrowding. It's not a new thing.
It's rough.
There's nothing to hide. Why aren't international journalists allowed in?
Are you worried about escalation?
Of course I'm worried about escalation, which is why my focus is on de-escalation.
The region, I think, is on edge because they are anticipating a retaliation.
Iran retaliates for the US attacks.
The founding principle of the alliance, that an attack on one is an attack on all.
Could Putin attack another NATO country within 5 years?
Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories.
This is insane.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Now, tomorrow marks 50 years since women across Iceland staged a mass walkout that reshaped gender equality in the country. Around 90% of women went on strike on the 24th of October 1975, refusing to work, clean or look after children to push back against discrimination. Well, speaking to Iceland's Justice Minister, Þorbjörg Gunnlaugsdóttir, I began by asking about the significance of the anniversary.
It's an historic day in Iceland, and it marked something. It marked a change. I'm born 3 years after this day, but since I was a little girl, I grew up hearing about this day, that all the women went on strike, some of them from their work, some of them from their households and homes, for small kids to find out that their father couldn't cook. And they managed to prove that with women away, society wasn't functional. And that was the whole point of it, to have society value work by women. And this we've done almost every year since, or at least regularly. And now, like you say, it marks 50 years. And it's a day of celebration, but it's also a day to underline that we still haven't reached the shore. I mean, for 16 years, we've been world champions in gender equality, according to a global gender equality index. But we are very much aware that there's still work to be done.
Take us back, though, to the 24th of October 1975. What caused such grievance among women? What were conditions like for them that they decided that they needed to take such drastic action?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the hero in the story is the Icelandic women's movement, and that's the root. Of course, in 1975, in Iceland, like in all Scandinavian countries and many countries in Europe, things were, compared to other parts of the world, relatively okay. But women were faced with the reality of simply, in simple language, simply not appreciated the way they should. Their work wasn't appreciated, their opportunities in the workplace was not the same. And they decided to show once for all that society was not functional without women. They took this decision of going on a one-day strike, and the nation understood. And what we see now, 50 years on, that this is a day of celebration, that girls, women, boys, and men in Iceland, all political parties that take themselves seriously, do know and do have to show that we take gender equality seriously.
So what was the fight for? Equal pay, equal political representation, fair working conditions. And how did that change come about? Was it an overnight revolution?
Absolutely not. It was not. But the change did, they managed to wake the society up. So now when we discuss, for instance, politics in Iceland, we are always aware of the impact and the importance of gender equality. If we discuss economics, when you're discussing education, when we're discussing the criminal justice system, we always think about and notice what will this possible change in legislation, for instance, what impact are we talking about when we look at the different lives and realities of men and women. Absolutely not overnight, and we are still battling this. And I sometimes, and many women, we talk about the Nordic paradox. And in that regard, I mean, we are world champions when it comes to gender equality. It's good to be a woman in Iceland, but still we are faced with gender-based violence as a reality of Icelandic women. Too many girls, too many women face and experience violence simply because they are women. And for me, as Minister of Justice in Iceland, I am very focused on this area when I'm discussing gender equality matters, because I know that this is a big part of the paradox. Why is it that we are champions when it comes to gender equality, and at the same time, women are faced with violence in the household, domestic violence. Many women face sexual violence, and this is a focus area for me.
And yet, the legacy of that day, you might argue, seen quite clearly in the Icelandic government. I mean, it's run by women, is it not?
It's a government run by women. It's a coalition government, 3 parties, all led by women. And of course, we are very proud of this. And this has an impact too. I am very much aware of the fact that this is the case, that we have many women in our government. Of course, this signals that we take gender equality very seriously.
And it inspired, I read, gender equality movements around the world. Is that something that you can see?
I do see it and I do hear it. And I think Iceland, as well as many other countries in Europe and Scandinavia, not the least, we hear it, we feel it, and we do take our role very seriously now when we are experiencing the pushback, the backlash. We can see it on the international stage by world leaders, and that's why it's so important to show that gender equality is a principle of human rights, but also a significant part of success stories, economic success stories for countries when we use the whole society and not half of it.
Iceland's Justice Minister sharing her thoughts there. Well, that is all from us on The World this week. We will be back on Monday as Donald Trump turns his attention to Asia with a meeting with China's Xi Jinping on the cards. Do join us for that. Next tonight, it is News at 10 and the press preview. I'll be back in just a moment.